Further leaks have emerged this week for the updated versions of the Nvidia Blackwell cards. I think we discussed this in the past, but it's now been all but confirmed by various leaks, including the king of all leakers, Copite 7 Kimi, effectively talking about precise specifications for 5070 Super and 5080 Super. It looks as though the 5080 Super is getting a VRAM bump. It's getting those 24 gigabit modules, which basically means a 16 gigabyte GPU becomes a 24 gigabyte GPU. And it means that a 12 gigabyte GPU becomes an 18 gigabyte GPU. So basically the same memory bus size, but more memory being addressed. It looks like the 5070 Super is getting a small CUDA-core boost, 6,400 cores versus 6,144 from the non-Super 5070. So you should expect to see a performance boost there, also higher power draw. And what can we say about the 5080 Super? It has that big memory upgrade.
Huge.
Also a big power draw boost, 415 watts versus 360, kind of crazy. Same CUDA core count though, 10,752. So there will be performance upgrades, but I suspect they will be quite slight, and it's all about the memory on the 5080, 5070, who knows what's going on there. Oliver, this doesn't look, I mean, bearing in mind there weren't huge performance boosts from 50 series anyway, over 40 series, doesn't look as though we're going to be seeing much in the way of further performance boosts, from, although the power draw increases are certainly intriguing. Curious what you think about this.
Yeah, these don't look like hugely enhanced cards from a strict kind of performance perspective necessarily in all titles. They just look like very similar cards, but with 3 gigabyte memory modules or 24 gigabit memory modules, to put another way, instead of 2 gigabyte modules there. So you basically get 50% more RAM, 8 gigabytes or 24 gigabytes, depending on the card here. And then, like you said, there's a small TDP increase or a moderate TDP increase. But I'm not that interested in these cards necessarily. I'm more interested in kind of two aspects of the market, both below these cards and above these cards. Because at the low end, specifically with like a potential 5060 Ti Super and 5060 Super, with 3 gigabyte modules, you could have 12 gigabytes of VRAM, which is kind of like the lower bound, I would say, for most titles these days, operating at like 1440p resolutions, in some cases 1080p resolutions, to have a really reliable experience with current generation software without just destroying texture quality. That's certainly where you want to be at. So that's a very interesting part of the market, and I hope to see some movement there in terms of a super line that does expand VRAM. I'm also very curious to see if Nvidia does anything at the high end, because I remember specifically when Jensen introduced the RTX 5090, he introduced Blackwell as an architecture that maxed out at 4,000 AI tops in GB202 in its maximum implementation, but the 5090 only has 3,400 tops. And I recall at the NVIDIA Editors Day that Alex and I attended, it was clarified that discrepancy was down to implementation, because as you might expect, the 5090 is not a maxed out version of the full chip. Indeed, the full chip has about 10% more shaders, TMUs, and ROPs. And then you assume there, okay, 10% more in those areas, then maybe a higher clock rate, and you end up with a chip that is substantially more powerful than a 5090 could be. So, is that really needed? I think that's another question, but could they do it? Maybe they could in some limited quantities, expose a fully enabled or close to fully enabled 5090 chip that does indeed reach the promised specs that Jensen had laid out. That would certainly be very interesting to see that, but it would also be kind of interesting from a power consumption perspective, because obviously we've already maxed out the 12-pin connector. Would they go to two 12-pin connectors? Obviously you're dealing with very, very high power consumption in that case. So that would be very interesting to see if they do pursue a card like that for that kind of ultra high-end experience. But really, I think the more interesting area for this discussion is really at the kind of low end, which has not been addressed by these leaks, because I think 8 gigabytes for a GPU in 2025 is kind of tough to square with the VRAM demands of modern titles.
Yeah. This higher end chip that you're talking about, I mean, there's this kind of big gulf between the 5080 and the 5090 where there's, plenty of room for another product to slip in. But it doesn't look as though we're getting that, bearing in mind that these leaks seem to be starting at the top of the tree and going down. So that's kind of curious, because some sort of cheaper card that offers 4090 level of performance with multi-frame gen, I think would be really good. But it doesn't seem like we're getting that. It looks like there is going to be a 5070 Ti Super as well, with the same 8,960 CUDA cores, but again, a memory bump from 16 to 24 gigabytes of memory, 50 watt power increase. I mean, we've shown in our reviews that this architecture could easily do 3 gigahertz, so there is potential for a performance boost there, but only by sort of 7-8% there. So it's not huge. It doesn't particularly excite me, this, bearing in mind that there wasn't a huge amount of excitement with Blackwell anyway. But I guess at least having more memory is a good thing. It's just that this is likely to be arriving like 1 year after the prior cards, which, there could be some buyer's remorse there, particularly for the 5070 owners. And yes, we don't know anything about what's going to happen with the 60 class products, which desperately need more memory. But John, what do you think about all of this?
I mean, anything related to increasing the amount of VRAM is a positive news in my book. I'll be curious to see. It's just when you start to get into these weeds where you've got like a 5070 Super, but also 5070 Ti Super, it just feels like they're just like filling the stack with so many products right in that tier that you start to wonder, like, what's the price differential going to be, right? Because like a 5070 Ti Super shouldn't be quite as fast as a 5080, but it will offer significantly more VRAM, which can be very useful for a lot of people, depending on what you're doing, right? So like it starts to like weigh these questions, like, okay, what is all this going to cost? And like, is there just too many of these options now? Like, I don't know. It starts to get a little bit confusing. Like they're putting all this thought into this very center of the stack, and like I feel like the lower end of the stack could use more addressing, especially in regards to VRAM at this point. So
yeah, I guess it will come. It's just that
hopefully this is what we get, right?
Yeah, those lower end products are literally brand new at the moment.
But also, you're right though. There's this gap that you pointed, like when we first were looking at 50 series, like the gap between 5080 and 5090 is quite massive, right? And it feels it feels like there's, because they're filling the product line with so many different potential products, that feels like a natural place for like a step between 5080, 5090. And I don't necessarily think a 5080 Super will get there, looks like. So I don't know.
Yeah, there's also the question of what's happening with all those GB202 dies, because there's going to be quite a few that have got a number of deactivated CUDA cores, but just don't seem to be being used for some reason.
Lastly, though, I love the idea of appending things like TI and Super, because like when you start to apply it to the low end, it just seems funny. Like you think of like an RTX 5050 Ti Super, and that just seems ridiculous, right? It's like taking like the lowest. It's like taking a Honda Fit, but it's like the Honda Fit Ultra Sport Racing Edition or something,
Well, they do stuff like that.
I know they do. I know, but it's just I don't know, man. It's a weird one.
Okay, more memory is a good thing. I think it's Oliver. Correct me if I'm wrong, but a move up from say 16 to 24 gigs of memory is pretty good also for AI applications.
Yes, that dreaded term. Yes, very good for AI applications. Obviously, like a 5090 is the best for those kinds of applications. I'm on consumer graphics cards with 32 gigabytes. And then for very large models, you really want to be talking about something like the Strix Halo product from AMD, but moreover, really the Apple SoCs there, which can go up to 512 gigabytes of RAM with the M3 Ultra at the moment. Those are really kind of the best consumer devices for like AI workflows, AI development, if you need those super high memory capacities.
There's the more standard consumer as well, though, where extra VRAM and grunt really pays off, because Microsoft, when you put all those Copilot buttons around, I think they're up to like half a dozen now, more than that actually. Each one of those buttons, to drive it effectively, you need a little bit more GPU power and memory. Like those Copilot icons don't come free, and they are everywhere.